Tonight, while you were sleeping, something woke you up. It wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't a noise. It wasn't thirst or hunger. You simply opened your eyes and, in the darkness of the room, looked at the clock. 3:33 in the morning. Or perhaps it was 3:44. Or 4:04. Or 4:44. And the strange thing wasn't having woken up at that hour. The strange thing was that you had already gone through this before. Last week. The month before. The year you don't even remember well when it began. Always that same interval between 3 and the first minutes of 5 in the morning. Always with that feeling that something, from the outside or from within, and one cannot quite tell where the boundary between the two lies, called you back to consciousness. And the question you haven't dared to ask yourself out loud is this: what is trying to synchronize with you? It is not a new question. I didn't invent it. There is a text that has been asking it for nearly 2,000 years, a text that was copied in Alexandria, translated into Latin during the Renaissance, and that most people have never heard mentioned. That text has an answer, or rather, it has something more disturbing than an answer. It has an explanation, and that explanation begins with the word the Hermetics used to describe the most fundamental nature of the cosmos: vibration. Before that word became the vague language of popular spirituality, before it appeared on crystal posters and meditation workshops, it existed in a precise philosophical text, written in Greek, copied in Egypt, which described the entire universe as a system of resonances in permanent motion. And that text said something specific about human consciousness that nightly awakenings make visible in a way that almost no other experience can match. To get to that, we have to open that text. The 11th Tractate of the Corpus Hermeticum bears a simple name. It is called Mind to Hermes, in Greek, nous pros hermen, and it is probably the most technical document in the entire Hermetic tradition. It is not narrative like the Poimandres, the first tractate, where Hermes receives his cosmogonic vision in a dream. The 11th Tractate is a direct conversation between the mind, the nous, the cosmic principle of intelligence, and Hermes Trismegistus, and the mind is explaining to Hermes how reality is made, not metaphorically, technically. The tractate begins with a question that the mind asks Hermes, and the question is this: where is the good? It is a question that seems philosophical, but the answer Hermes receives transforms that question into something completely different. The mind answers, the good is in that which is not at rest. And then it adds one of the densest statements in all of Hermetic literature. It says that on earth there is no good, because on earth there is rest, that the good cannot exist where there is stillness, that the good is, by nature, movement, eternal movement without pause, without interruption, without end. And then the mind describes the cosmos. It says that everything in the universe moves. Not everything we can see moves. Everything, without exception. What seems still moves inward. What seems dead vibrates outward. What seems solid oscillates between its own molecules. And what seems silent is filled with a frequency that the physical ear was not built to capture. This was written by someone, or several, for Hermetic authorship is complex and disputed, between the 1st and 3rd centuries of the Common Era in Alexandria or in some other center of Greco-Roman Egypt. There is no computer in that picture, there is no measuring instrument, only the philosophical observation that nothing at any level of reality remains static. And the text then arrives at what interests us directly. It says that human consciousness also vibrates, that the nous, the divine portion of the mind, is not a fixed substance housed in some point of the brain. It is a movement. It is an oscillation. And that oscillation has a specific property. It seeks resonance. It actively seeks that with which it can vibrate at the same frequency. In terms that the 11th Tractate itself uses, the mind seeks its like, always, without rest. And when it finds something that vibrates like itself, what the text calls synharmonia occurs. Tuning, joint harmony, the moment when two distinct vibrations collapse into a single shared oscillation. There is a detail in the history of that text that is worth pausing to consider. The Corpus Hermeticum, as we know it today, was gathered and translated into Latin in Florence in the year 1463. Cosimo de Medici, who financed the Platonic Academy of Florence, received a manuscript brought from Macedonia by a monk. The manuscript contained 14 Hermetic tractates in Greek, and Cosimo, who was already old and knew he had little time left, ordered Marsilio Ficino to immediately interrupt his translation work on Plato, which was Ficino's primary commission, to translate the Hermetic tractates first. That says something about the urgency those texts generated. Ficino finished the translation in a few months. He called it Pimander, taking the name of the first tractate. And when that translation circulated through the intellectual circles of the Italian Renaissance, it produced something that historians of philosophy still debate: a complete reorganization of how the European intellectual elite understood the relationship between the cosmos, the mind, and time. Because the Hermetic texts did not just say that everything vibrates. They said that time vibrates differently depending on the level of consciousness experiencing it. And here is where the nightly awakenings begin to have a context you hadn't considered. There exists in the Hermetic and Neoplatonic tradition, which are related but distinct traditions, a concept that comes from a source much older than the Corpus Hermeticum. It comes from the Pythagorean school, which precedes the Alexandrian tractates by several centuries. That concept is the music of the spheres. And though the name sounds poetic, the idea behind it is rigorous. Pythagoras, or his followers, for here too authorship is complex, asserted that each celestial sphere, each moving body within the cosmos, generates a frequency as it moves, that the universe, as a whole, is an instrument that plays itself, and that human consciousness, if sufficiently purified or sufficiently awake, can perceive that music, not with the ear, with something the Pythagoreans called the ear of the soul. Nicomachus of Gerasa, a Pythagorean philosopher of the 2nd century of the Common Era, a contemporary then of the Hermetic texts, wrote a work on arithmetic that the Hermetics and Neoplatonists cited constantly. In that work, he describes the relationship between numbers and cosmic frequencies with a detail that surprises with its conceptual precision, and among the numbers he analyzes, 2 appear repeatedly with properties he considers unique: 3 and 4. 3, says Nicomachus, is the first truly complete number. 1 is unity, 2 is division, 3 is the first synthesis. In musical terms, 3 produces the interval of a perfect fifth, the most stable resonance that exists between 2 distinct notes. In philosophical terms, 3 is the structure of the soul according to the Platonic tradition: the rational part, the appetitive part, and the irascible part. In Gnostic and Hermetic terms, the helic, the psychic, and the pneumatic: matter, soul, and spirit. And 4, Nicomachus continues, is the first number that can organize material space. 4 elements, 4 cardinal points, 4 seasons, 4 phases of the moon. 4 is the signature of the physical, the structure that makes matter recognizable and navigable. When 3 and 4 combine, they produce 7. And 7, in the entire Hermetic tradition from the Poimandres to Iamblichus, is the number of the planetary spheres through which the soul descends before incarnating into a body, the number of the journey inward into matter, and the number of the journey back. Sit with that for a moment. The interval between 3 and 4 in the morning is not just a moment on the clock. It is the point where the number of the soul and the number of matter coexist in time, and in the Hermetic tradition that has a name. It has a meaning. Before continuing, there is something I need to tell you directly. What you are hearing on this channel you will not find in conventional media, not because it is secret in the conspiratorial sense, but because the texts we explore here require time, research, and access to sources that go far beyond standard entertainment content. We have gathered everything we investigated about the Corpus Hermeticum, the principle of vibration, and the synchronization systems of the soul in the pneumatic code. It is a study guide that expands upon what this channel can barely touch. The link is in the description and pinned in the comments. Only available while this video is online. Stay with me because what comes next in these texts is even more specific about what exactly happens between 3 and 4 in the morning. There is a 4th century philosopher who connects all these threads in a way that no other thinker of late antiquity matched. His name is Iamblichus of Chalcis, and his most important work is called De Mysteriis, on the mysteries. Iamblichus was Syrian, a follower of the Neoplatonic school, but with an important difference from his master Plotinus. While Plotinus believed that union with the divine was purely contemplative, that the soul could elevate itself toward the one through pure thought, Iamblichus insisted that this elevation also required practice, ritual, action, what he called the ergi. And in De Mysteriis, Iamblichus describes something that is almost impossible to find in any other text of antiquity, a theory of sacred time. He says that the cosmos does not vibrate uniformly during the 24 hours of the day, that there are periods when the vibration of the soul is in natural resonance with the vibration of certain cosmic frequencies, and periods when it is not, and that the knowledge of when that resonance occurs is part of the ergical knowledge. It is not superstition. It is, according to Iamblichus, physics of the soul. The text says this in precise terms. It speaks of hours in which the divine principles, those the Neoplatonists called henads, units participating in the one, are more available for reception by human consciousness, not because the universe stops at those hours, but because the vibration of the universe at those hours produces a specific type of interference with the vibration of the sleeping body that Iamblichus calls an opening. An opening. Not an illusion, not a dream. An opening. And what is it that opens, according to Iamblichus, at those specific hours? He says that what opens is what in Greek he calls the psyche pneumatic, the pneumatic soul. The part of consciousness that does not belong to this level of reality, that is here passing through, and that in the full waking state is so saturated with sensory information that it cannot capture the signals coming from higher levels of cosmic vibration. But when the body sleeps and the senses fall silent, that part of the soul is left exposed. It is left literally in the open air. And in that state of exposure, any cosmic vibration that is at the correct frequency can do what Iamblichus calls resonantia, resonate with it, make it vibrate, bring it back to wakefulness not as a thought, but as an urgency, as the need to open one's eyes and be present. 3:33 in the morning. It is no accident that the number appearing on the clock is a triple number. The Hermetics knew something about repeated numbers that has an internal coherence modern interpreters often overlook. In the Hermetic tradition, the repetition of a number in a cosmic context is neither coincidence nor ornament. It is what in the Corpus Hermeticum is called sphragus, a seal. The seal is not a decorative mark, it is a sign of resonance. It is the evidence that a vibration has reached the threshold necessary to leave a trace in perceptible experience. When you see the same number repeated, what the Hermetic text is saying, with all its technical precision, is that the vibration in question is strong enough to manifest in more than one layer of reality simultaneously. At the level of objective time, the clock, and at the level of your state of consciousness, the awakening, at the same time. That is what Hermes calls in the 12th Tractate a consonantia, a consonance. Two distinct vibrations that, at a specific moment, move at exactly the same rhythm. And the question the Hermetic text would ask before such consonance is not what the number means. The question is, what within you vibrates at that frequency with sufficient intensity for the cosmos to have been able to reach you? Here is where we need to go deeper. And to do so, we must open another text that most people who know the Hermetic tradition have ignored. The Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation. It is a text of Jewish mysticism whose date of composition scholars place between the 3rd and 6th centuries of the Common Era, although some of its ideas are clearly older. In the philosophical circuit of late antiquity that goes from Alexandria to Rome to Syria to Palestine, Hermetic texts and texts of Jewish mysticism crossed paths, read one another, and influenced each other. Ficino himself knew it. Pico della Mirandola, Ficino's contemporary in the Florentine Platonic Academy, studied Kabbalah alongside Hermetic texts because he understood they formed part of the same field of knowledge regarding the structure of reality. And the Sefer Yetzirah does something no other text of antiquity does with such clarity. It describes the process of the formation of the cosmos through three fundamental categories. It calls them the three mothers, in Hebrew, Aleph, Mem, and Shin. Fire, water, and air, and it calls them that because they are the three primary frequencies, the three vibrations that, when combined in different proportions, produce everything else. 3 is not just the number of the soul in the Sefer Yetzirah, it is the number of the original frequencies, the 3 notes the cosmos uses to compose its music. Beneath those 3, the text places 7, the 7 doubles, the 7 Hebrew letters that have 2 possible pronunciations. And beneath the 7, 12, the 12 simples, and the complete scheme yields 22. The 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet which the text describes not as linguistic signs, but as frequencies of vibration with which the cosmos was built. 3, 7, 12, 22. The 3 again. The first, the foundation. And when the Sefer Yetzirah speaks of the 3 mother letters, it says something that connects directly with what Iamblichus and the Hermetics are describing from another angle. It says that the 3 mother letters have a correspondence with time, with the year, the month, the day, and that in each temporal cycle there exists a point where the 3 primary frequencies coexist simultaneously, not in succession, at the same time. And that this point is, in the terms of the text, the seed, the origin, the moment when the process can begin anew. In the 24-hour cycle, when does that happen? In the transition zone between midnight and dawn, when the day that ended no longer is, and the day that will begin is not yet. The interval that the Hermetic texts call in Latin, following Ficino's translation, medium noctis, the middle of the night, which is not mathematically the middle of the hours, but the point where darkness reaches its maximum density before beginning to give way. Between 3 and 4:30 in the morning, depending on the time of year and latitude, that point occurs exactly there. Let us return now to the Corpus Hermeticum because there is something in the 11th Tractate we have not yet touched, and that is crucial to understanding what is happening at that moment of awakening. The mind tells Hermes that there are 2 types of knowledge. It calls them gnosis and episteme. Episteme is the knowledge acquired through the ordinary process of learning, observation, reasoning, accumulation of data. It is the knowledge that grows slowly, that builds upon itself, that requires time and sustained effort. Gnosis is something else. The mind describes it as knowledge by contact, not by process, by touch, by resonance. As when 2 strings of different instruments vibrate at the same frequency, and the one closest to you transmits the sound of the other to you without anyone having touched it directly. And the mind says something that interpreters of the Corpus Hermeticum have debated for centuries. It says that gnosis is only possible in certain states of consciousness. That the ordinary waking state, saturated with sensory perceptions, with worries, with plans, with active memories, generates too much internal noise for resonance to be produced. That for gnosis to arrive, something in the system must first fall silent. And the state that most naturally produces that silence is not prolonged meditation, nor fasting, nor ritual. It is sleep. Or more precisely, the threshold between sleep and wakefulness, the exact moment when you are awake enough to perceive and asleep enough for your internal noise not to interfere. The hypnagogic and the hypnopompic, modern psychology would call them, the phases of transition into sleep and back from it. The 11th Tractate does not use those terms because they belong to the 19th century. But it describes exactly that state with the vocabulary it has available. It calls it the hour when the nous descends, not because the nous comes from the outside, rather because the nous which is always present ceases to be blocked. Like the sun that was always behind the clouds, the sun did not arrive, the clouds left, and in that hour, the text says, the soul that is in a position to resonate, resonates. What woke you up at 3:33 was not the clock. The clock only showed you the number. What woke you up was something that was vibrating at a frequency compatible with yours. And your soul, the nous, the pneumatic component, the part of you that the Sefer Yetzirah would have called the mother letter in you, responded before your brain had time to decide whether to respond or not. Before continuing, and because what we are about to explore is the most technical part of this entire system, I want to pause for a moment to tell you something important. This channel exists because there are people like you who look for something more than superficial explanations, who need the texts, the sources, the arguments. YouTube removed our monetization and kept putting ads on our videos anyway, collecting that money while we received nothing. We tried to remove it. The system kept running. That is why we created the pneumatic code, not as a business, as a way to keep this research alive without depending on a system that actively works against us. If what you found here mattered to you, the link is in the description and pinned in the comments. Only available while this video is active. That is what keeps this channel standing. Now let us return to Iamblichus, because De Mysteriis has a chapter that is almost never cited in this context and which contains, in my opinion, the most precise description of what occurs in that nightly awakening. In the fourth book of the treatise, Iamblichus describes the three types of signals that beings of higher levels of cosmic vibration, those he calls gods, demons, and heroes in the Neoplatonic vocabulary, without the negative sense those words have in contemporary usage, use to communicate with human consciousness. The first type is the vision, the image that appears in sleep or in deep meditation. It is the best-known channel and the most documented in the mystical literature of all traditions. The second type is the voice, the internal word that has no outer sound but is experienced with the same clarity as if it came from outside, also widely documented. The third type is what Iamblichus calls kinesis, movement, a disturbance in the state of rest that is neither image nor word. It is simply the sensation that something changed, that the balance was altered, that there is presence where before there was absence. And Iamblichus says that this third type, kinesis, movement, disturbance, is the most difficult to interpret, but also the most reliable, because it cannot be produced by imagination or by desire. Imagination produces images. Desire produces internal words that say what we want to hear. But neither of the two can produce the pure sensation that something in the field vibrated. That is only produced by a real vibration, and the vibration that woke you up at 3:33, according to the internal logic of these texts taken together, is not random. It is not the result of indigestion or an irregular sleep pattern, although those explanations also exist and should not be dismissed. The question that the Hermetic, Pythagorean, and Neoplatonic texts are asking collectively is this: why the same hour, repeated week after week? What pattern in you responds systematically to that specific frequency? Because a random event does not repeat itself with that level of precision, and a pattern that repeats itself with that level of precision indicates resonance, and resonance indicates frequency compatibility, and frequency compatibility indicates something about the nature of what vibrates within you. Here is a concept from the Corpus Hermeticum that needs to be introduced carefully because it is easy to misinterpret. In the first tractate, the Poimandres, which is Hermes's cosmogonic vision, the text describes the process by which the soul descends through the 7 planetary spheres before incarnating into a physical body. In each sphere, the soul acquires an additional layer, a density, a set of characteristics that correspond to the nature of that sphere. The soul that arrives in matter already brings with it 7 superimposed layers that make it heavier, more opaque, less capable of resonating directly with the frequencies of the origin. But, and this is crucial, those 7 layers are not permanent. They are, according to the text, garments, not substance. And the reverse process, the ascent, consists in letting them go one by one as the soul becomes capable of vibrating at higher frequencies. The Poimandres describes that process of ascent in terms that are simultaneously cosmological and experiential. It says that the soul that has begun to release the layers begins to feel something the text calls nostos, the Greek word for return, the impulse toward the origin. And it says that this nostos is not a philosophical idea or a religious belief. It is a vibration, a specific frequency that the soul that has begun to purify itself recognizes because it already knew it, because it is the frequency from whence it came. And the question that the first tractate leaves implicit, it never formulates it directly, because Hermetic texts rarely formulate their deepest questions directly, is this: how does the soul know that this frequency is the correct one? Not by reasoning, not by doctrine, by resonance. It recognizes it because it vibrates exactly like itself. And that brings us back to 3:33 in the morning. There is a Greek word that Iamblichus uses in De Mysteriis to describe the process by which a divine frequency seeks out a specific soul. The word is sympathia. In Latin, the Neoplatonists translated it as sympathia, and the idea it contains is one of the most sophisticated in all of ancient philosophy. Sympathia is not just sympathy in the sense of affection or emotional closeness. It is a physical property, or metaphysical, depending on the conceptual framework you use, of the cosmos. The idea is that the cosmos is not a collection of separate parts that interact from the outside. It is an organism, a living being, and like every living being, its parts are interconnected not by direct contact, but by internal resonance. Plotinus, the great systematizer of Neoplatonism in the 3rd century, describes sympathia in his Enneads with an image that has become classic. He says that the cosmos is like a living animal and that all its parts affect each other without any of them touching, in the same way that when you tense a nerve at one end of the body, the other end feels it. There is no messenger. There is no chain of intermediate causes. It is a direct affectation through the field. And if the entire cosmos functions in that manner, if it is true that everything vibrates and that everything that vibrates is at some level of resonance with everything else, then the question of what woke you up at 3:33 has an answer that no mechanical mechanism can give. You were awakened by something that vibrates in sympathia with you, something that has a frequency compatible with the frequency of what is most fundamental in you, not with your body, not with your thoughts, with what the Hermetic texts call, with all the technical precision of the Alexandrian vocabulary, the nous pneumatikos, the pneumatic mind, the component of your consciousness that you did not acquire by living, the one you bring from before. And that is where the question becomes truly difficult to sustain. Because if you accept the internal logic of these texts, and it is not necessary for you to believe them in a religious sense, only that you read them with the same seriousness with which you would read Aristotle or Kant, then what is trying to synchronize with you in that hour is not something external searching for you as you search for someone in a directory. It is something that is already in resonance with you because it is of the same nature as you. It is not visiting you, it is recognizing you. And the reason why that recognition occurs in that specific interval, between 3 and the first minutes of 5 in the morning, is not because that is the shift schedule of some cosmic force. It is because in that interval, according to the Hermetic tradition we have traveled, the noise is reduced to the minimum sufficient for the signal to arrive. The body is still. The senses are closed. The field around the nous pneumatikos has the least interference that the 24-hour cycle can offer. It is the window, and what passes through it is not an apparition. It is a vibration that already existed. Only now it can reach you. The Sefer Yetzirah has a verse in its first section that medieval commentators debated for centuries, and which in this context takes on a completely different meaning. It says, "Examine them, test them, investigate them, set the thing in its place, and restore the Creator to his throne." In the context of the system of the Sefer Yetzirah, that refers to the process of examining the 22 letter frequencies and understanding their relationships. But there is a secondary reading that medieval Kabbalistic interpreters, especially Abraham Abulafia in the 13th century, developed with great sophistication. The process of examining, testing, and investigating is not merely intellectual. It is experiential. One must place oneself in the state where the frequency can be directly recognized, and that state is not produced during a day full of activity. It is produced in the stillness, on the threshold. When you open your eyes at 3:33 and the room is silent and the clock shows that number you have already seen too many times to keep calling it a coincidence, what the Sefer Yetzirah would say is that you are on that threshold, that the field is open, that the frequency is available, and that the question is not whether what woke you up is real. The question is whether you know how to listen to what vibrates. What the Hermetic texts as a whole, the Corpus Hermeticum, the De Mysteries of Iamblichus, the Enneads of Plotinus, the Sefer Yetzirah, are describing from different angles is a phenomenon that is not mystical in the sense of incomprehensible. It is a phenomenon of the physics of the soul, if we want to use that term. A phenomenon of resonance between levels of reality that do not normally touch because the noise of the ordinary waking state prevents it. And when the noise is reduced, when the body sleeps, when the senses fall silent, when the ordinary level of consciousness withdraws far enough, the nous pneumaticos is left exposed to the frequencies of the level from which it descended. And if any of those frequencies vibrate at a level compatible with yours, that resonance wakes you up. Not as a vision, not as a voice, as kinesis, as the sensation that something in the field moved. And the number on the clock is not the cause of your awakening. It is the signature, the sphragus, the sign that at that precise moment, in that second when the cosmos and your nous coincided in the same oscillation, physical time and the time of the soul reached the same point simultaneously. 3:33 or 4 minutes or 4:44. All the numbers in that interval share something. They are configurations of 3 and 4, the soul and matter, the pneuma and the soma, what came from above and what came from below. And in that interval of the early morning, according to the internal logic of the texts we have traveled, those two levels are at the point of maximum proximity. Not physical, vibrational. That is why you can feel it. And that is why it is worth asking yourself the question that none of these texts will spare you from having to answer for yourself. If what vibrates at that hour is compatible with what is deepest within you, with the nous pneumaticos that the Corpus Hermeticum says you did not acquire by living but bring from before, what does that say about what you are at the most fundamental level? What frequency do you carry with you that the cosmos recognizes with sufficient precision to seek you out at that hour, on that threshold, with that repetition that can no longer be called an accident? The Hermetic texts do not answer that question for you. That would be episteme, knowledge by instruction. What they offer is something different. They offer the context, the structure, the vocabulary, so that when you find yourself again on that threshold, with your eyes open in the darkness and the number on the clock, you have something more than wonder. You have the possibility to listen, because what is trying to synchronize with you at 3:33 in the morning did not arrive for the first time last night. It has been vibrating since long before this body, before this name, before this century and this continent and this particular life you call yours. And it has found you. The only question that remains is this. Did you already know it? Before this video ends, I want to pause for a moment to tell you something. What we explored today, the Corpus Hermeticum, the Sefer Yetzirah, De Mysteriis of Iamblichus, has been waiting centuries to be read with this seriousness. YouTube removed our monetization and kept running ads on our videos anyway, collecting that money while we received nothing. We tried to remove it. The system kept running. That is why we created the pneumatic code, not as a business move, as a way to keep this information reaching more people, without depending on a system that actively works against us. If what you found here mattered to you, the link is in the description and pinned in the comments. Only available while this video is active. That is how this channel stays alive. Just as these texts survived 2,000 years of suppression, we keep finding a way to carry on.